Hi, welcome to Alternative Views. Tonight's program will look at the less majestic side of the law in the United States. Our program entitled tonight is The American Police State. And with us to discuss the problem, we have in an encore performance, back with us again, John Duncan, the head of the Texas ACLU. Welcome. And with us to discuss a couple stories in their lives, Barbara Hines from the Legal Aid Society, who will talk about her efforts to obtain a dossier compiled by the FBI on her. An interesting story. And we also have Jim Lutz from ACTV, working with them for the last 3 years, who has some interesting film of last year's boat race on Town Lake, where it led to a Chicago-style police riot. But before we get to that, as usual, we'll go to the news, and Frank and Al and the rest of the folks.
Well, here's a headline you don't see on television nowadays, or even in the regular newspapers. But the National Enquirer has it, gas crisis is a big hoax. And unlike the other story up on top here, which says how to avoid traffic tickets, which tells you basically don't break the law and don't sass the cops, the gas crisis being a big hoax is backed up with some statistics and some opinions from high-level people who should know. For instance, they quote Dr. James Patterson, who's an economist and oil industry expert from the University of Indiana, is saying it's a hoax. He uses American Petroleum Institute figures to prove it. He says the U.S. gasoline stocks stand at 259.6 million barrels, 12 million barrels more than 1977 when there was no crisis. Crude oil stocks are 305 million barrels, 32.7 million more than 2 years ago. And the demand for gas has only risen a tiny bit, only 0.3%. And even according to the Central Intelligence Agency's latest estimates, there's more oil, gas, and petroleum products in the U.S. pipeline than at any time in history. If that isn't enough, there are other people who chime in. Professor Fred Singer, an energy economist from the University of Virginia, and a former high-ranking Interior Department official, said that these figures show that the oil crisis is a blatant fraud. And Senator Howard Metzenbaum, a Democrat of Ohio, says the same thing. The oil companies are trying to hold on to their oil as long as possible and wait for the highest price they can get. And they're trying to frighten the American public just to run up the prices.
It's interesting to note, Frank, that the big three reported last night on TV that gasoline reserves are actually down. So I wish they'd get together with Mr. what's his face there.
And also their own outfit, the American Petroleum Institute. Well, there are others who they have also quoted, a statistics editor from the Oil and Gas Journal, an attorney for independent oil companies, president of Consumer Energy Council for America, and other people. The GAO, for instance, the General Accounting Office, all say the same thing. And then, in addition to this, they made a survey of Germany, England, Switzerland, and France, various people from spokesmen of auto clubs to people who are in a Ministry of International Trade and Industry in Tokyo, for instance, or various high-level agencies. They say, we're not feeling any crisis. We're not scared. What's the big panic in the United States? I guess it's the panic to the bank. Well, hey, we've talked about white-collar crime. Remember a while back we were talking about some of the pats on the wrist, which some of the rich people get if they're caught in the cookie jar.
Misdeeds.
Yes, that's right.
Misdeeds.
We've got to understand those poor folks.
Right,
you know.
by well-meaning people.
Well, here's another one. The federal grand jury in Houston is looking into a couple of small oil companies who were involved in oil scam. What they were doing was fraudulently converting barrels of old oil into new oil and selling them at a $6 price over the regular price. And the one guy who's head of the company made $4.4 million on this. Well, under plea bargaining arrangement, he agreed to refund $3.2 million if they would drop the charges against him.
Write it off as a business expense.
Yeah.
It still nets $800,000. Not bad.
Yeah, that's like you stealing the $1,000 from me, and the court saying, well, that's okay.
Pay back $600.
Yeah, pay back $600, and we'll call it even. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about this is that most people don't realize that the major oil firms, which are vertically integrated, have been doing this for years. They're passing costs forward, so it goes on the corporate books as a cost, but actually it's increasing their cash flow. This is something we did talk about in Alternative Views, I believe, last year.
Well, this is what the Arabs are also saying the big oil companies are doing right now. They bought a lot of oil under the old contracts at the old price, and they're selling it on the independent or spot oil market at considerably higher prices.
Yeah, up to $24 a barrel.
Yeah. Well, you have a couple of things there, too.
Well, Frank, we have a swine flu update's what we have here, something that a lot of us would prefer to forget. I'm sorry we don't have our visuals, you know, down pat today, because there's a beautiful photograph of Jerry Ford with this moronic grin on his face, getting the swine flu shot.
Especially for police.
Right. This is from the Journal of Insurance. Typical of government spending, we have a $135 million program that has ballooned into a $3 billion disaster. As of last year, in terms of the deadline for filing for claims on swine flu, there are 278 claims for wrongful death totaling about $300 million, and 3,000 claims for personal injuries, not the least of which is the Berry syndrome. People get about 95% paralysis from this, totaling almost $3 billion in claims. The original estimates of the claims against the government were something in the order of $1 to $2 billion. So again, the insurance industry has fallen a little short on their estimates. But here we have a program that is supposed to benefit the health of the people, and instead we have people croaking, dying, getting paralyzed, and then suing the government for $3 billion. Now, if you remember, back during the swine flu program, the private insurance sector wouldn't touch this thing with a 10-foot pole. Part of the bill to provide funding for the major drug companies is that they remove any liability from the drug companies for the issuance of the swine flu. The other thing in the news is actually a contradiction between the Wall Street Journal, not a contradiction, but it's kind of, I guess, a difference in taste or difference in reporting styles on corporate profits. In the Wall Street Journal today, we have corporate profits after taxes surged 9.6%. Now, that doesn't sound like a whole lot.
9.6%.
9.6%. That's actually what they're talking about, and if you read the article in detail, they're talking about from quarter to quarter. Of course, what we heard on the news last night and what we have from the AP sources is that actually corporate profits over the year increased 26.4%. And this is the largest increase since 1950. After-tax profits soared 25.2%. But here's what some of the people in power are saying about this. I think it's rather interesting. The very large increases in profits of American corporations will strengthen the widespread belief that many American businesses aren't assuming their full responsibilities to fight inflation. This is Alfred Kahn. Kahn also was quoted on the evening news as saying something to the effect that, well, high profits necessarily by themselves are not bad, but if they're caused by high prices, then he sort of trailed off. Lyle Gramley, who is a member of the Council on Economic Advisors, says, it makes us wonder if the business community is taking seriously the guidelines we have put into place to hold prices in check. Now, Kahn has promised that he will publish a list of names of corporations who are showing higher than usual profits. And I'm certain that will offend them so that they'll reduce their prices. He has also pointed out that most large corporations seem to be in compliance with the guidelines. The primary offenders are small businesses and medium-sized firms.
Jack, you got a couple of goodies too, do you not?
Yeah, I've got a few here. I wasn't going to appear on today's show, but a friend gave me...
We're happy you did, Jack.
A friend gave me this particular article that appeared in Monday's Texan, written by a clown named Mark Dooley. It's under the column of Reporter's Notebook. It is probably one of the most misogynist pieces I've ever seen in any. That's woman-hating, by the way, in any print or electronic media. Let me read just a little bit of this twerp. My father has this Bobby Riggs theory that things in general have been going downhill at an alarming rate ever since women got the vote. After giving the idea considerable thought for 6 minutes, I must concur. Well, the article goes downhill from here.
He's capable of thought for 6 minutes. I think that speaks for itself.
Well, he said the problem is basically that, quote, women have just gotten too damn uppity. Take Kate Millett, for example. Please, he adds. Henny Youngman.
That was funny back in the 40s.
Yes, of course. And he talks about Kate Millett's recent expulsion by the Ayatollah Khomeini from Iran. And he says, 3 cheers for the Ayatollah. Chalk went up for the good guys, gals, and get back in the kitchen or get pregnant. To go on, I really don't want to belabor this point. He's not worth it. A problem, he says, that in America today, the Shanna Alexanders and the Jane Fondas and the Barbara Walters and alike indicate that we have a, quote, high threshold for mindless women and ignorant sluts. This is what further he has to say. This is revolting, I understand. What this country needs is an Ayatollah or two off with their heads. The Fonda syndrome will kill us all. Now, if I've done you wrong, Mr. Dooley, and what you meant was satire, then I apologize for impugning your character. But it's your writing style then. Because you're not in the same class as Dan Aykroyd or John Belushi. In my book, you're part of the not ready for any time players.
And they're not all that sharp.
And they're not all that sharp either, as witnessed a couple weeks ago with their women's problems. But let's bring it closer to home. Rather, let me talk about some Iran, since we're talking about Iran and women. This is something from the revolutionary regime in Iran, which I, a few weeks ago, applauded their coming to power, and I still believe so, but they need to get their act together over there. An unmarried couple caught having sexual relations were publicly flogged in the Caspian Sea town of Amesh for refusing orders by revolutionary authorities to get married. She got 100 lashes, he got 25. But lest we leave you on too sour a note,
we have some good guys in the news?
We'll have to give you some happy news.
Good.
This is our Charles Kuralt story of the week here. A Hampshire college student, that's in Amherst, Massachusetts, was fired from his job in the college cafeteria, it seems. He was fired for refusing to obey orders to stop doing such things as writing "no nukes" in carrot sticks on top of the salads and making hammer and sickle designs in the wax on the cottage cheese. Says David Bates, 23, I was only trying to break up the boredom on the job and provide some enjoyment for the cafeteria patrons. Keep it up, David, wherever you're going to be in your next employment.
Well, if you're ever in Texas, David, you can come and join us here on Alternative Views.
I guess they don't even let them drink tomato juice because it's red, right?
That's right. Red tape, red tape.
So here's one that I don't know what's going to do to the tobacco industry, but there's a study's been made in Alabama that there's a high incident rate in southern women of mouth cancer because so many southern women dip snuff and chew tobacco.
Just take a little pinch, put it between your cheek and gum.
Yeah, you get good cancer in about 15 years. There's an interesting thing going around now. John, you might have a comment on this. It's called, people are calling it gray mail, not black mail, but gray mail. There are 3 different stories that come in and tie this together. A perjury case against Edward Garrity, the senior vice president of ITT, was dropped by the Justice Department because it feared the disclosure of national security information. He'd been accused of lying about ITT's role in the 1970 Chilean presidential election, of course, with a great deal of connection, very close connection, cooperation with the CIA. And then about the same time, there was a case that was dropped against a Singapore banker who had been accused of bilking millions of dollars from investors in California. But the charges against him were dropped also because he had a special relationship with the CIA. And now in the nation, they're talking about the same thing might occur in this in the suit against Patrick Gray and other high FBI officials. They're saying that several well-placed sources confide that the prosecution of these men who are accused of ordering burglaries in private homes might be dropped to avoid exposing secret information in court. John, is there...
Well, it's a part of a trend.
Yeah.
The March 20th Dallas Morning News has a little story right along the same line. Attorney General Bell has had a contempt citation
that's one
pending against him for some months now for refusal to disclose FBI informants and who did a lot of the burglary of the Socialist Workers' Party. The Socialist Workers' Party has a $40 million lawsuit pending against the U.S. government for surveillance that went back into the 1930s, and they never showed a violation of the law at any time with any of this stuff. There were numerous instances in which the FBI illegally broke in. In an attempt to, in a discovery order, a federal district judge ordered the Attorney General to turn over these records, and Attorney General Bell refused. Again, it's the national security, protection of the informant. The Second Circuit now as reported on March 20th, has removed that contempt order and said there are other ways that you can pursue this. Basically, the other way is to drop the charge in default and allow the taxpayers to pay out the $40 million to the socialist workers rather than to present the information. And what you wind up with is taxpayers paying for the incompetence and the crimes committed by public officials in damages back to individuals.
Well, what can we do, you suppose? I guess not a heck of a lot. I keep looking here for a good story. I can't find one, so I guess I better close with a quote from Ambrose Bierce. And this is dedicated not only to President Carter, but also to our last several presidents. Ambrose Bierce's epigram was, "He whose lies no longer deceive has forfeited the right to tell the truth." Jack, shall we get to...
Yeah. Let me maybe lay some historical grounding for a discussion of the American police state and inequality of enforcement of the law. In 1895, the Supreme Court in 1 year ruled minimum wage laws unconstitutional, a violation of free contract. They also ruled that the income tax was class legislation and also unconstitutional, but turned around and ruled that the Sherman Antitrust Act, which did not apply to manufacturing companies, did apply to labor unions. Well, if you think that's part of the sort of just sordid, seamy past that we have come of age as a country, and we now conduct our politics and our lives more above board, and now in post-Watergate morality and the like, that we, with sunshine laws and a commitment to equal justice, well, think again. We have some interesting people here tonight to discuss that this is not part of our past, that this continues today. And John, I think you're going to bring us up to date in some of the contemporary forms of repression in this country.
All right. I suppose when we think of the police state, we tend to think of federal government, FBI, the abuses of the Nixon administration. They're classic examples of a movement toward a police state. But what I really want to start off on today was some of the things that are pending before the Texas legislature, because this stuff would not go on if you did not in some fashion create a public environment in which the public agrees to give up certain constitutional rights, most of the time without thinking very seriously about it. Our previous governor, Dolph Briscoe, had, as many of you will recall, a law and order package, or anti-crime package, in the 1977 legislative session. If you looked at that package on a piece-by-piece basis and put it together, it had most of the provisions in it that you would have gotten in Senate Bill 1.
Son of Senate Bill 1.
Yeah, or son of Senate Bill 1 during the last legislative session.
First cousin.
Yeah, first cousin, whatever. But what we're experiencing now, and I'll have to say we were reasonably successful in making most of the proposals in the Briscoe package basically meaningless that got through the session last time, is the whole thing has reappeared now. What we've got is retreaded Dolph Briscoe law and order with Governor Bill Clement's signature across it. Last week he
interchangeable parts. You notice this? It doesn't matter.
Introduced or put out a press statement saying, "On many occasions I have stated I am for strong and effective law enforcement and recommend that the legislature adopt measures that will enable local, district, and state law enforcement officials to do a better job." And then he starts listing off bills which he will support as part of a law and order package. An examination of those bills shows that what you have coming back is essentially the same thing that a very conservative legislature rejected in 1977 insofar as the proposals are concerned. You've got electronic eavesdropping again. We scream drugs, crime, this sort of thing, and suddenly we hand to the police the tools by which they can go in and legally invade everyone's privacy. Forget about the Fourth Amendment. Forget about the Fifth Amendment. Just let them go in and listen to everyone.
This has something to do with that evidentiary search warrant?
That is a second one. It goes from electronic surveillance to evidentiary search warrants. Texas has a good search warrant law, one of the best in the country, in terms of protecting individual rights. We do not have any broad-based search warrants based upon the fact that mere evidence might be found that a crime might have been committed. which essentially would allow any police officer in anybody's door. That's what these people want. And here it comes back in exactly the same form. Oral confessions. Last legislative session, the governor finally pushed through an oral confessions law after we in the Criminal Defense Lawyers Association managed to tag some safeguards on it. It said basically that if an oral confession is to be introduced, it must be tape recorded in the presence of at least 2 people, and the tape must show the person who is making this confession being warned that it is being taped, that it will be introduced in court, that it will be used against them, and that it can be introduced only if that person takes the stand and makes a statement that contradicts something that is said on that tape. It's something that protects any individual against getting a confession beat out of them. And then having a police officer say, well, this is what he said. What you've got over there now is a bill that goes back to what they proposed last time, and that is any police officer can get on the stand and swear that so-and-so said such and such and confess to this crime, and in effect put the police officer on the stand to testify against the defendant and allege that it was the defendant's words. Texas has a provision that prohibits the state to appeal from appealing in a criminal case. It's something that keeps a particular vicious DA who's got something in for somebody from as soon as he loses his case from running into court and appealing it and continuing to harass the individual.
There was a gentleman like that up around Dallas, wasn't there? A guy who had about 2,000 of his convictions overturned. One of the local DAs up there, I believe, for haranguing witnesses and stuff like this.
Dallas County has a very high rate in terms of convictions being overturned for prosecutorial misconduct in the courtroom. But
I didn't want to interrupt your train of thought, but what about the practice of a lot of JPs of keeping a batch of search warrants, you know, on hand for cops to use anytime, anywhere?
Well, on the books, we've got a good search warrant law. The problem that you've got is with JPs and municipal judges who very often will sign any search warrant without really sitting down and having a full probable cause hearing. They sign the warrant, and police officers then go in and search a place, tear a place apart. The worst parts of these abuses occurred routinely back in the early 70s on the anti-war people, in which they would allege possession of narcotics and go in and just tear somebody's apartment apart and say, you know, sorry.
Yeah. Is there any way we can safeguard this? Is it putting a listing of civil rights or Bill of Rights or something up on the JP's wall so that he can at least look at it before he, you know, routinely signs? I mean, aren't they supposed to do some sort of research before they sign these things?
Well, ideally they should, but as a practical matter, it's very difficult.
You know, I'm always really suspicious when they say, well, you know, don't worry about this repressive law because we're going to go to court and we're going to have a judge. We're going to have a judge say it's all right. And the judge says something. I've seen the most stupid people in the world are judges, and the most abusive of civil rights are judges.
You've got that problem with the wiretapping bill.
Yeah.
They'll always come in and say, this has got safeguards in it. It will require a judge's signature. And this provides adequate safeguards. Well, perfect example of the fact that there can be no adequate safeguards is the fact that in Texas at the moment to install a wiretap is a third-degree felony, or is a federal felony, unless there has been an order issued to a federal agent by a federal judge. It means that no police officers in Texas, no sheriffs can legally install a wiretap, and if they do so, they commit a federal felony. Well, the Houston Police Department has, on a number of occasions, had officers indicted under federal law for violating that, and we've just seen the charges against the sheriff up at Burnett. He's entitled to be presumed innocent unless proven guilty, but federal charges have been brought against him saying that he was going out to install a wiretap. Now, if commission of a federal felony...
somebody who wasn't even there.
Yeah, if commission of a federal felony is not sufficient to keep people from doing this, certainly no safeguard is going to exist by getting a judge to sign the thing first.
You mentioned something before the show started also about this bill that had something to do with the Department of Public Safety, which I think is very interesting.
Well, that's one of the worst bills that's been introduced over there in a long time.
Who, by the way, excuse me, who introduces this? So it's nice to have names with some of these violations or these misdemeanors.
Betty Andujar, state senator from Fort Worth, has it on the Senate side, Senate Bill 14. Carlisle Smith, state representative from Grand Prairie, has it on the House side, House Bill 64.
Very good.
This would set the Department of Public Safety up as a pre-employment screener for private employers. It would set them up as a pre-credit screener for banks, mortgage companies, your various credit bureaus.
Lie detector test, the whole bit?
It does not do lie detector test. What it is a criminal record system in which those who have a need to know, not the press, they have no need to know under this bill, those who are entering into a private business transaction in which money will be exchanging hands, either through a payment of wages or through loans or any other commercial transaction, or those who contemplate such relationships may buy from the Department of Public Safety arrest record information based on a daily basis, so that it would be possible for these private security firms just to have a blank check deposited with DPS and on a daily basis take every arrest record, valid or not, regardless of disposition, and place it in their own private computers and use this as a gigantic blacklist in terms of screening public employees. These companies that do this investigation deal in dirt on people. The more dirt that they can turn up and the more hysteria they can generate with employers, the more contracts that they're going to get. And what you would do is say, I were pulled over coming down the freeway driving my little yellow Toyota, and somebody else has been charged, or there's a police radio thing going out, so-and-so in a yellow Toyota robbed such-and-such bank. They pull you over, you vaguely fit the description, they haul you in, they fingerprint you, and the whole bit, run you into DPS to see whether or not you've got a record. The record is created there, and
used against you in your employment then.
For the rest of your life, you would have that thing following you around, though they might cut you loose the next morning, saying, arrested, armed robbery. It's the worst thing that's been introduced in a long time.
I think it's the thing that aggravates me is that we pay the salaries of these yo-hos who pass this kind of garbage or try to pass this kind of garbage.
But, John, I'd like
I want to ask my wife if she's paid her bank payments this month, because I certainly don't want to get pulled over on the way.
John, you did mention that there is something, that law doesn't exist divorced from the public climate. And how do you explain the ability of law enforcement officials and politicians and their apparently blank check that the public hands over to them in terms of
it's a matter of
laws?
Creating a hysterical climate. We've got a crime problem in this society, and nobody's going to deny that. But we also have a legal system that is designed to protect the rights of the innocent, to protect the average citizen, to see to it that the police do not run rampant over everyone. And from time to time, you will get political figures who are able to manipulate public fear. Much of that fear is justified. The crime levels in some communities are very great, and there are some areas of the country where a person cannot walk the streets safely. And you get opportunistic politicians. Nixon was a perfect example. Agnew, when he was there, in terms of the law and order type thing. The Briscoe appeal was essentially of the same variety in terms of his law and order program, in which the public fears are manipulated. And the threat of physical violence to any one individual is greatly exaggerated. An attitude of public fear is created. And at that point, then you run it into the legislature in a semi-hysterical environment. And anybody who opposes some of this just based on basic constitutional provisions is thought then to be soft on law and order.
One of the things is I've always thought is one of the chief culprits, especially here in Alternative Views, it's appropriate for us to mention, one of the chief culprits in mobilizing public opinion to support these kind of repressive laws is the media, which talks every night about murders and killings and rapes and muggings, but really doesn't give a context to understand, or pawns off as being just sociological do-gooders that talk about what are the roots of crime in the first place. Let me ask you, the head of the Texas ACLU, just take a couple minutes. What's the roots of crime? Tell us, our audience. Tell me. Tell us.
A whole lot of it, I would argue, is economically and sociologically based. If you look at who winds up in the Texas Department of Corrections, it's basically those who come from poor families, from minority families, those whose mental capacity is not as great as the average citizen, those that are essentially the left-outs of society. And programs that are designed to assist people of this variety routinely get knocked down in terms of more welfare, more giveaways, destroying incentives, and what have you. The human needs, human resources sector of the budget is the one that is always the last to be funded.
I think you put your finger on it right there. I remember reading in the Philadelphia Inquirer a few years ago that after the riots in Philadelphia, which is based on that central city problem, I mean, the people there are absolutely poor, relatively poor, any way you want to call it. Instead of coming in and helping people remodel homes, people don't like to live in housing projects, basically. If they own something, of course, they'll take care of it. Instead of putting money into that sort of thing, they came in and gave the police tanks, arm crushers, shields. They put money into the police part of it, but no money into the economic development part.
But part of that too little is part of the too little too late closing the barn door after the horse is gone that ends up costing, actually, if you're interested in fiscal conservatism, ends up costing you more money. The failure to have sort of minimum income maintenance in this country, which might come to a family of four, of about $8,000 if we took sort of a McGovern proposal, and ends up with costing $15,000 to keep a man in a penitentiary, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we were talking about violation of civil liberties and police running rampant, and you mentioned the Socialist Workers' Party and all a while ago. We have Barbara Hines with us, and Barbara's going to tell us about her situation in relationship with the FBI and the dossier that was compiled on her. We frequently hear about these, but we really usually don't have an opportunity to hear firsthand from somebody who actually went through it. Can you tell us a bit about your experience?
Well, I started looking for my FBI file because I had read an article in Ms. Magazine, and there was also an article in Mother Jones, which is another sort of left-wing magazine, that the FBI had kept massive dossiers on people that were active in politics in the 60s. So several friends of mine and myself just decided why not to send off. And we sort of laughed about the party we would have, and we agreed to all open our files together and things of that sort. We did it under the Freedom of Information Act, which under the law, it's the Freedom of Information Act, Privacy Act, a federal statute. You were supposed to get information within 10 days. In order to get my 100-page FBI file, it took 9 months. And the first letter that I got back from the FBI said, "Thank you for your request. Your request has been..."
And your support.
And then it said, your request has been assigned number 29,000, I don't know what. We are now processing requests from a year ago. And really, there have been so many people that have taken advantage of this law, I don't think anyone that ever passed it, the legislators that drafted that law, ever thought that there would be the public use of the Freedom of Information Act that there is now. So about 9 months later, I got a letter saying that if I wanted to send them $10 for 100 pages, that they would send me my FBI file. And basically, some of it is routine civil service employment. A lot of it is a lot of surveillance that went on in the 60s.
Excuse me, Barbara, what led you to believe that there was a file on you in the first place?
No, I just did it just because I read that I was very involved in the women's movement here in the 60s when there were about 10 of us running around talking about women's liberation at the university, and everybody thought we were crazy. I also worked on the RAG, which was an underground newspaper, and I was involved in the anti-war movement. here in the 60s, and so I just thought I would write off. And in some ways I thought, sure, they probably did surveil. I mean, we always thought there were informants in the movements we were involved in, but...
They were afraid it was paranoia back then, but it was very real.
And then, of course, everything we thought was true. The conclusion of my case was that I was classified as disloyal number 3. The government has a 4-point loyalty scale. The first, as I remember, I did a lot of research into this because I did an appeal, and I asked that my file be expunged. And basically, after 6 months, they did agree to expunge my file, though I'm not sure it's ever going to be done.
There's no way of
I got a letter saying they were going to do it.
Oh, yeah,
they'll go onto the Army computer bank or something.
Well, you know, the catch-22 on that is if you write them and ask them for your file and they don't have one, they use that letter to start one on you.
Exactly.
Or they send back sometimes, if you will, we will search our records if you will tell us the times and the places and
No, they asked me for
which
that.
you think you were under surveillance.
I've heard that some of the stuff involves newspaper clippings, some of it involves maybe insurance information. They have access to the insurance information, whereby if you've ever asked for auto insurance or something, an insurance agent or life insurance, an insurance agent may come around and he'll ask your neighbors if you know this person. Say, well, we don't know him, but we know that his lights are on all night. You know, what the hell does that mean? I mean, some of the information can be innocuous, some of the information is just pure gossip. Was yours like that? Was any of yours like that, or was it real hardcore surveillance?
No, there are two things. The first was I applied for a civil service job with the Internal Revenue Service, and they did a routine security investigation. But under the law, when loyalty of an employee is the loyalty is questioned, it converts into a full field operation investigation. That's what they did in my case. In addition to that, now I didn't apply for the job.
Excuse me. Full field means they actually come in and ask all of your neighbors down the street?
They have about 10 pages on all of my parents' friends in Brownsville, where I went to high school. They went to all sorts of professors, friends. I mean, it is really incredible the amount of information that they gathered and the waste of money. And that is probably the most incredible thing. Then they also have information starting from 1969 through 1972, which is my political activities. Nothing involves any breaking of law. I mean, it was sort of free speech that I went to a demonstration. They had things, they knew what meetings I went to, how many people were at the meetings. Then they have a little statement that Women's Liberation is an organization, if I can remember what they said, dedicated to the overthrow of male chauvinism and being dirty. that was this FBI agent's idea of what women's liberation was then. So as to guilt by association, there was nothing in this file that I was a member of the next 5 pages of organizations in which they defined SDS, Progressive Labor, every left-wing organization around in the 60s, so that in case you wanted to know about all these other things, that is also in my FBI file.
What does this ranking number 3 mean?
Well, I wish I brought my file where I did a lot of legal research on it when I was writing my appeal to the Department of Justice. Number 1 are people that are known communists or anarchists or members of subversive organizations. 2, I think, are people that associate or belong to organizations that are communist or anarchist or subversive oriented. And then 3 are people that are seen at these meetings, something of the sort, I can't exactly remember, or associate with people who are supposed to be communists.
Excuse me, where would the ACLU come in on the top of the order there?
We've been involved in some of this. In fact, the DPS was involved in the same sort of thing. Now, Colonel Spear is on record over in the federal court as saying that none of that was ever authorized and that it had all been destroyed.
It was not authorized and it's been destroyed, which means...
yeah. And the suit that we brought on behalf of an airline pilot who was brought under surveillance for attending an speaking against nuclear power before the Dallas City Council. Nice little dossier there, running down his Dick Tracy background in the Marine Corps, you know, all straight. For those he just happened to be opposed to nuclear power.
Right. For those people who don't know what you're talking about, John, this was the guy they thought might take one of the commercial airlines and drop it into a nuclear plant, right?
Oh, this finally wound up as being their justification. Is, well, an airline pilot might dive bomb it into a nuclear plant if he's anti-nuclear.
I didn't mean to interrupt. That was in the news a couple of years ago.
Yeah. The file, though, on the DPS thing started out with criminal, organized crime, racial, subversive, other. And he was checked as being subversive. we've got a copy of the thing over in our office as part of the lawsuit. It's sort of interesting how DPS left the agent hanging in terms of personal liability. Colonel Spear got on the stand, denied a la Mission Impossible and all of this. If you are caught, we will deny any of this stuff. And left the, saying none of that existed, the whole bit, and left the agent hanging on the thing. So all you agents out there, if you get caught, you're going to get left hanging.
Dangling in the wind, so to speak.
Well, there's some of them might not get caught,
no.
Oh, excuse me.
No, the other thing you were asking about the ACLU. The ACLU asked for its own file. And they shipped the first installment in 20,000 pages, and that got them up to 1940. We've got a committee with our national organization pouring through that thing. It's run up to close to 100,000 pages now in terms of on the organization and on individuals in the organization.
One thing I might add is that if you request your file from under the Freedom of Information Act, you won't get it all. There are large deletions in my file stamp.
Swiss cheese documents.
Not to be disclosed for national security reasons.
You have national security?
Oh, yes. In fact, they gave me the reasons, and the main reason is not to be disclosed for national security reasons. And if you do the research, there's an executive order that was issued under Nixon setting out the standards of what constituted national security. And there are things like people that will disclose information concerning to foreign agents concerning, our bombs and, things that really had to do with national security, not someone running around in Austin, Texas talking about a woman's right to an abortion. I mean, there's nothing under the executive order that would allow the things that they kept on me or kept from me in their deletions.
Yeah, I hope the viewers of this program understand exactly what's going on. This is a person who believes that women should have the same rights as the rest of us, who was against an immoral and illegal war, was never declared constitutional. And for this, our taxpayer dollars, which could be doing useful things, went into investigating her and labeling her and keeping files on her. I mean, this is absolutely absurd.
Yeah, I'll give you another example of DPS.
Okay.
Charter member of the ACLU is 94, 95 years old now, lives up in Dallas, Carl Brandon. They had a file on him, and they got him because he was the Socialist Party candidate for governor in 1936. And they've been following him ever since then. It gets that silly, really.
It's not silly.
One of the things that I would say to the viewers is that the ACLU publishes a handbook, How to Get Your Personal File. It has the law in it, the form letters to the various agencies in which you plug in your name, cite the law, the proper sections, and how to proceed. And anybody out there who thinks that they may have a file and would be interested in seeing it can call the American Civil Liberties Union office here in Austin, and we can send them a copy of that.
Right, because we don't all have the same expertise as Barbara.
The other thing I would say is that if there are any lawyers out there who are interested in litigation on this area, we do publish a book, Litigation Under the Freedom of Information Act, that's now in its 4th edition, and it has basically all of the pleadings and the law that you need to file any sort of Freedom of Information lawsuit.
Well, thanks, John. We've been talking here about DPS and the FBI, but we're not going to let our own local gendarmes off too easy.
Oh, how could we?
We have with us, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Jim Lutz from ACTV, who took some extraordinary pictures, filmed last year at the boat races on Town Lake. And maybe you can give us some background of the film before we see it.
Okay. I should go back probably to when the controversy first arose several years ago along Town Lake, where the boat races are held. It's on the periphery of the Chicano community, and for years there have been protesters and petitioners who have gone before the city council to try to have the location of the races moved, to no avail. The previous city council, previous to the one that is now in session, had voted to cancel, to keep the boat races from occurring there in the future. And the new city council came in and reinstated the boat races. And the Chicano community, members of the Chicano community, banded together to demonstrate at the location at the date of the first race. There are 3 races each summer. And about 100 demonstrators on the Saturday of the race last year came to the races and were met by the police, and it ended in 18 demonstrators being arrested, charged with failure to obey lawful order to get out of the street. They were standing on the side of the street, off the curb, and if you'll run the film, I can probably you can see from
Let's look at that film.
what actually
Okay,
occurred.
well, before we do that, wasn't there some action, police action taken against either one or some of the police?
And what was the
involved in
outcome
this?
of that?
And then wasn't there a grand jury also investigating?
Well, there was one officer who you will see in the film who had clubbed one of the demonstrators who was already being held.
This was a guy
Hit with
without a
a
uniform,
nightstick.
right? This is a guy
He
without
was
a
out of
uniform.
uniform, and there was supposed to be a federal grand jury hearing resulting from an investigation that the FBI did, and the federal grand jury was set up for September, which was about 4 or 5 months after the boat races. And about a week before the federal grand jury was to come off, it was canceled, and I've never really heard why it was canceled. And I have a letter here from the U.S. Justice Department written to Mr. Paul Hernandez, who was the complainant. And I might read the result of their investigation. It says, after careful consideration, the Civil Rights Division has concluded that the facts of this case do not furnish a basis for criminal prosecution under the federal civil rights statutes, and we are therefore closing our file on this matter today.
Well, we'll let the viewers make their own conclusion after they look at the film.
Yes.
Want to run?
At this point, the policeman has grabbed my camera as I'm walking across the street. I'm wrestling with him, trying to regain use of my camera. It's turned off as I'm going across the street. At another point, the policeman also hit the camera from the side as I was viewing another scene. One thing that's really interesting is that in the African American Statesman and the local TV news media, the headlines were that the Chicanos had attacked police with a baseball bat and hammers, claw hammers. And however, no one was ever arrested for having used a baseball bat. However, one demonstrator had a baseball bat. It was taken from him early in the demonstration, and no one was ever arrested. No policeman was ever identified as being hit with a baseball bat. However, the headlines, as I mentioned, were that one policeman was hit, and it's as if the information that the public gets, they get the feeling that no wonder that the police, some of them maybe had overreacted, because after all they were probably very excited after one of their fellow members had been hit with a baseball bat. However, the event never even took place. The Austin Union Relations Commission met and viewed this film and recommended that to the police chief, Dyson, that police should have a policy in the future to deal in cases like this. Of course, there will never be a case identical to this. And so they didn't really recommend it. It's a multi-ethnic commission. However, they really didn't recommend that any action be taken against Officer Smith. And Police Chief Dyson said at that meeting that had Officer Smith really wanted to inflict any harm on the individual, he really could have, and that seemed to be justification that he really shouldn't be charged. With more than a suspension, he wasn't even 5 days.
You guys get back behind the curb, all the way back. Get on the curb, all the way back.
He was previously suspended also for putting someone in his custody who was him.
He's a real tough guy, isn't he?
You know, some of
Now that fact wasn't before the commission. They did not know that at the time of the commission.
I was just going to say, there is a bill coming before the legislature right now, Senate Bill 546 by Jack Arch, which would make it a third-degree felony.
Get out of the street, I'm not going to tell you again.
Going directly toward the tourist base over here. I don't know whether it's something contradictory here or
just what? Some people, a lot of people have very good relationships or good experiences with the police. Now, some of the campus police, I had a family problem, and they were absolutely wonderful. I mean, just, helpful. They put in overtime, unpaid. They were considerate, they were kind, and yet, on the other hand, you get these other situations, and there are just many, many articles in various magazines of the police brutality in Seattle, Los Angeles, Houston, Salt Lake City, and Austin. Is it that there are few or many bad apples that are recruited, or is it that if you hit the wrong button, you'll get the bad reaction? What is it, you suppose?
I think a lot of it is that if you do hit the wrong button, that you get the bad reaction. That if you go politely, a lot of them will be pretty polite. If you talk back to them, it triggers something, and I don't know what it is in the mentality of police officers that causes that belligerent sort of reaction, but a lot of them do have it.
Also, you mentioned
also, there's a mass psychology in which they are against everyone.
Correct, but they do operate under a real
stress.
state of siege mentality. My uncle is a policeman that works in Brooklyn, and he's had real situations where he's come up against it. When he's called late at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, into a tenement, he has no idea what he's facing.
Well,
he's almost
70%
killed
of all
several
policemen
people.
killed during domestic squabbles.
Exactly.
Most police officers would rather answer anything than a domestic disturbance call.
Right.
Because they're most likely to be injured in that sort of thing.
Yeah. They're really put up against it. You talked about the economic and social causation of crime, and they're really put in as the buffers by politicians and who have failed to deal with the real questions of wealth and power distribution in this country. They're asked to sort of be like the cavalry guarding over the Indians on the reservation.
Let me point something else out. We're not really taking this whole thing as a condemnation of our police force. We're taking this as the way I see it, as condemnation of the violations, the abuses by the several, right?
Right. And it's part of a structure. People usually focus on the police as individuals, but it's a part of a structure that goes
If the department is organized in such a way that when something like this occurs, that the officer is disciplined, you'll get a whole lot less of that.
We didn't have that in the Austin case, right?
And I don't know what disciplinary actions were taken against any of those officers.
A 5-day suspension is hardly what we call discipline. Of course, with the FBI, I think we can fairly well condemn the entire organization. I don't think they've proved themselves to be too useful in the past.
There goes your dossier. Just went up another 15 pages.
I've always wanted to be important.
Well, we see the enormity of it, for instance, just in the Karen Silkwood case, where I was counting from a story that was printed about Karen Silkwood case. She was involved in, or at least there were, directly or indirectly, there were 13 private and public law enforcement agencies or companies focusing on that one woman, Karen Silkwood. And my God, this is just a drop in the bucket compared to what it is. And there are nationwide public and private organizations which have dossiers, which have computer banks of names. The House Un-American Activities Committee, when it quit working, it turned things over to a private
the insurance
industry
has its own.
Things back.
Right, the insurance industry has its own computer bank up in Boston, where they keep information that is available to other corporations from some of their random searches based on people who have, applied for life insurance. This is in David Hapgood's book, Screwing of the Average American.
Frank, one short comment. Some of our viewers may have objected to the title of our program being the American Police State. For sure, we don't want to give anybody the impression that we are a totalitarian regime like the Soviet Union. But to the extent that we do not have a police state is because the people are informed and they watch over their government and they make sure that our liberties stay intact.
Well, I don't want to be too dramatic. I think it's because of people like Barbara, Jim, and John here that we do find out about these violations and abuses. I mean, awareness is the first step.
Right.
This goes back to Thomas Jefferson, our right to know.
Thank you. We want to thank you for being with us. And
enjoyed it.
Increasing our dossiers all. I do have a bedtime story here which goes back to our original story talking about the oil crisis. And once again, we talk so much about people and percentages and money that we don't talk about people enough, at least the people who are at the bottom being affected by it. The problem of keeping warm, just keeping warm, is a big problem with a lot of people today. The Wall Street Journal had a story about Mrs. Bowers in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. She had to move out of her home because she didn't have enough money to pay the utility company so they wouldn't turn it off. They estimate there are at least 25 million, many more other people estimate, 2 or 3 times that many, who are below a federal poverty line that can't even pay these bills at all. And Mrs. Bowers is above the poverty line. Talks about other people, a widower making $206 a month supporting his indigent mother, and he's cut back to 1 meal a day to make sure that his mother has food. And a Pennsylvania woman had a problem. She had to sell some of her furniture in her house. It had been in the family for 50 years in order to just make ends meet in order to heat their house. It's a tremendous problem. However, on the other side, here's what the energy consultant for an investment firm said. He said, the oil crisis, we must first of all consider the imponderables. And then a spokesman for the New York Public Service Commission, when asked what they would do about having some kind of system set up so they wouldn't cut off the heating for people during the winter, he said, we don't want to give any deadbeats a hunting license. However, Mrs. Bowers said simply, I don't want to leave my home, but it's hard to keep going. I'm only human, and I have to stay warm. Maybe we should accent Mrs. Bowers instead of the Public Utilities Commission when we think about these problems. Good night.